With WesternUnion.com's 4-star rated mobile app, send money fast virtually anywhere for just about anything. Download the free Western Union mobile app today from iTunes or the Play Store, or visit WesternUnion.com to learn more.
Can you feel it?
Durant for three, bingo! Right down the chute, Kevin Durant.
NBA Lockdown with Bruce Bowen.
Gets it to James. Here's a three for the win. Oh, it is good!
The NBA Lockdown Podcast with Bruce Bowen. Along with three-time NBA champion Bruce Bowen, here's ESPN.com NBA columnist Israel Gutierrez.
Welcome into another edition of the NBA Lockdown Podcast with Bruce Bowen. I'm Israel Gutierrez. The Game 7s, 5 of them, the fourth and fifth one, ended on Sunday.
You know, you're playing for your lives, and you got to sell out for your team. You know, I really didn't have a great offensive game. I was in foul trouble most of the night. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. You know, I just tried to go up. I saw him split the defenders. I saw him go up. I went up with him, got my hand on the ball. Game over.
That was Paul Pierce talking about his game-saving block on Kyle Lowry at the end of the Nets' 104-103 win over the Raptors. It got tight there at the end. I thought Kyle Lowry kind of forced the issue there, was going 1-on-3 for a minute, and then put up a shot that got blocked by, Paul Pierce, not exactly a shot-blocking savant. Bruce, just quickly your thoughts on how that game ended for Toronto.
Well, I thought the inexperience showed up more in that last play. And this is where having experience, you know how to just kind of calm yourself and try to take yourself through the steps before they even actually take place. You know how they're guarding the pick and roll, and everything has been about the Toronto Raptors driving the basketball. Well, Izzy, I know we have the luxury of seeing replays, but even in the replays, there is only one person in a good position to do something other than Kyle Lowry. And, it was Patterson in the painted area after he came off the screen. If he could have gotten the ball there, then you would have had a better shot. But here it is, Kyle Lowry, young and really having a great playoffs, took it upon himself as a leader, as a guy who wants that ball in that position. He took it upon himself to say, hey, we're going to win with me doing this or we're going to lose with me doing this, which is you respect that. But even in that, you have to get people in the right position. You have to make the best decision for your team. And that was more of the issue for me, was that the decision he chose to go with did not help his team. But the flip side is that his teammates didn't help him either. You had Terrence Ross close to half court watching him. You had DeMar DeRozan watching him. You had Vasquez watching. Those are the moments where you need guys in position. Maybe if they are, he sees that and he's able to get off the ball. But it was one of those deals, Izzy, where, the Brooklyn Nets, even with them, the turnover, once they called a timeout the first time, Izzy, I said, they're in trouble. When they use that, I said, son, you got the wrong person inbounding the ball, because you got to have someone that can see exactly what's the best opportunity, and it's usually the first person that's open. And at that particular moment, they didn't take care of the ball. They kind of lost their lead. I still don't know how they do it, but they're the veteran team, but they make such mistakes towards the end of the game.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious. It was one of those situations where Kyle kind of had it going, or made the clutch baskets or whatever the case may be, got to the foul line and figured, hey, let me just do it one more time. And that's where the inexperience comes in, because you realize, well, Brooklyn knows that you're going to go for it too. And when the game's on the line, like for real, they're going to assume that you're going to try to take over again, and that's fine. That's where you got to make a play, and next time he'll know better. But I'll say this much about the Toronto Raptors. I'm a fan. I think going into next year, assuming Lowry's on the team, DeMar DeRozan, Valanciunas, Terrence Ross, assuming those guys are still there, forming that core, I'm a fan of that team. I really like what they've done. I like where they're going. I want to see them grow. That's the part that is most intriguing, because you know that there's room to grow, so you want to see them get better, especially in in Ross and DeRozan. And just an interesting stat, they played 11 times this year, the Nets and the Raptors. The final score of those, the cumulative score of those 11 games, 1,070 to 1,070. So it's pretty fitting that came down to a Game 7 and 1 point game. But let's move on to discuss these Nets. I mean, Joe Johnson looks like he looks like the guy who was worthy of that giant contract he got. Maybe not worthy, but close to it. As Jay Adonde tweeted out, you might not want that contract on your books, but you want this guy on your team. And Joe, what is it about Joe, Bruce? I mean, you've seen him in person, you've seen him now, a little bit older, but still finding a way to get his shots off. He just seems to have this really strong base. He's always on balance. It feels like you can never really rattle him, and he doesn't have to jump square over you, to get a shot off. How difficult is it to defend Joe Johnson even at this point of his career?
Well, especially at this point of his career, he understands that it's not about moving fast to different places, but it's about being quick to certain spots. You saw an array of dribbling moves when he pulled up for a jump shot, with Patterson on him. I'm watching him. I see how he's setting him up, getting to the exact spot he wants to. Whereas maybe early in his career, Joe was looking to try to go one-on-one and show what he could do. Well, he's had the luxury of being a go-to guy not in Phoenix, but in Atlanta. And then you go from Atlanta to Brooklyn. He already has the qualities, but now the team is the opponents aren't just solely focused on him. He can actually operate kind of like he did when he was in Phoenix with Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire. So he utilizes his body well, number one. And number two, he shoots the ball well, and he's not a high-value shooter all the time. And that's where you get the quality as compared to quantity. He utilizes his mismatches real well. His body, he's about 6'7". And at 240, he uses his body real well. Banging guys, his banging is to get the guy off position, and he goes right into his shot right after he bumps him. So he's able to finish with contact, but he's also a player that doesn't shy away from the contact, is he?
Yeah. The thing to me, let me ask you this, without getting too deep into the next round, because we'll preview that for tomorrow's podcast, but the biggest issue or reason you saw the Nets defeat the Heat 4 times. Now, let's be honest. It was 3 one-point games and 1 double overtime game. Although one of those one-point games was a furious comeback by Miami late in the game, so that was kind of a decisive Nets win. But what was the biggest reason? To me, it looked like, Bruce, that they just have, with Joe and Paul, they had like bulk and size and length and the wings, and so they can both collapse in the paint and recover without being the quickest, guys in the world, because they have that. They take up a little bit more space than other guys. And then you have real length in the middle with Plumlee and athleticism, and then Garnett, when he was able to play in this series. To me, that's the biggest reason. Like, Miami was not able to shake free for a bunch of open threes, nor were they able to finish over some of these bodies, and they kind of made it an old school type of game. Was that what you saw when you saw Brooklyn play Miami this year?
Well, I saw a little bit of that, Izzy, but I also saw a veteran ball club that was taking away the strength of Miami. You had the more concentrated effort to get back in transition, especially, and really invite the three-point shot, invite the jump shots, because they understand and realize that their best opportunity to compete with the Heat is to take away their strengths if they can. And when they're not getting good production from the shooters, it really makes it tough for the Miami Heat. So, I like the fact that it also helps build confidence for a lot of the other guys. I'm not worried about the confidence of, say, Joe Johnson, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce, but I am worried about the confidence of Darren Williams if things aren't going well for him, and Plumlee, who can come in and give you good minutes, along with Sean Livingston. And then you gotta keep Thornton in the mix as well, because of his ability to get hot real quick and have a huge impact. In one of those games, he was really big for them as far as knocking down shots when their offense goes stale. So, Izzy, but I think it ultimately boils down to the physicality. Can Brooklyn sustain a upbeat or a transition game? Will this series that they just went through against Toronto, has that taken a lot of wind out of their sail?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think some of these series that go long, the rust versus rest thing, the series that go long versus the team that's on a significant rest period. I feel like the team that's in rhythm, the team that just came off a game, is more likely to come out feeling good and playing well in that first game of the next series. So we'll see what Brooklyn looks like regardless. of their age. But I think it's going to obviously be pretty intriguing. But I think that the Brooklyn Nets are going to take a page out of your guys' book from last year, at least when it comes to LeBron and Dwayne, and force them to take jump shots because, guys like Paul and Joe Johnson, even the other guys you mentioned, Thornton, anybody else that comes into the game, not going to really be able to stay in front of Allen Anderson, not going to be able to stay in front of LeBron or Dwayne if they really have an attack mentality. So I think they're going to back off, make them shoot, and try to frustrate the Heat that way and try to, get the nerves going the way it might have happened against San Antonio. But speaking of those Spurs, they had the final and least dramatic of the Game 7s, beating the Mavericks handily.
Off the inbound shot, no good. Aaron Baines the rebound, and they can run the clock out with 10 seconds to go. It's Cinco de Mayo tomorrow in San Antonio, but the party is going to happen tonight. There's the final horn. San Antonio needed 7 games to get by the Dallas Mavericks, and they blow out Dallas in Game 7, 119-96.
That was Mark Kestershire on ESPN Radio. Kesty getting the Cinco de Mayo festivities going early down there in San Antonio. Bruce, this is what I expected for more games in this series. Why did it finally show up? Other than, Tony Parker going beast mode, why did this finally show up for the Spurs, this side of them?
Well, they defended. They got back to who they are, Izzy. And you look at Game 6. The first quarter, they give up over 30 points in that quarter, and they give up over 30 points in the fourth quarter. Izzy, that's not San Antonio's brand of basketball. They don't want to give up 30-point quarters. That's ridiculous. So for them to have that happen, they're trying to outscore Dallas. And when you try to outscore teams and that's not who you are, usually play to their level, and usually when you're playing at someone else's level, they're going to win because that's the way they're dictating things. So I think, yes, Tony was in beast mode, but more importantly, Monte Ellis wasn't a factor. Dirk Nowitzki wasn't a factor. In all these games, and Vince Carter was not a factor. All these games, they have been huge factors at some point of the game. So you take those things away by getting back to your priorities as far as defense is concerned, then things start to flow for you if you take care of that first and foremost. That's why Greg Popovich is not one of those that really enjoys encouraging just the jump shots first. He wants guys to take it to the basket. If you take the ball to the basket, there are so many good things that can happen from that. You can get fouled, you can find someone else when the defense helps, or you can score a layup. So now it's about getting back to the defense, and this was their best game of the series, Izzy. They had control of this game from jump, and, you knew it was that way, whereas before in some of those other games, there was a lull, and then they lost out on the defensive aspect of things.
I wonder what it was or what it is about Tony Parker that people sort of forget, or maybe they just don't pay close enough attention because he is, San Antonio Spur and, they have their ways and there's a lot of balance, or he doesn't necessarily need to get big numbers for this team to win. But, you obviously know him pretty well. When he gets into this place where he needs to score or he needs to show off how good he is or he needs to be the guy for his team to win, how does he sort of make that transformation? Like, is it something where he says to himself, okay, I've got to play better, and here's the best of Tony Parker? Or is it just, one of those things where he just happens to be having a good game? Because I feel like when he's in that mood and that mode where he's just kind of like, you guys forgot how good I am. And you saw him talking to his former teammate there, Dwan Blair, during the game. I feel like when he gets angry, you get this side of him, but you don't get it very often. Is that right?
Yes and no. He understands that so much is required of him, and there's times where he kind of slips back into chill mode, and that's where Pop is constantly getting on him. You saw when he didn't play him in that fourth quarter in Dallas, or I should say late in the game, he wasn't on the floor. Pop's thing with that is, well, you got to do a better job. You need to be that person we need you to be, and so it usually works out for him where now he has a bigger game the next time out because Pop is sending a little message to him like, I don't want that Americanized French guy. I want that French guy that has that competitive nature in him. So I think that's more or less it in the fact of DeJuan Blair. I was glad Tony did that. Send a message to this guy that used to be a teammate of yours that's out there talking noise because he's had little success. Now he wants to chirp, chirp, chirp. And Tony just went to show him, no, don't reach on me. Don't reach on me. I will go by you just as I did.
All right, I'm going to try to continue to unlock the mystery that is the San Antonio Spurs. Boris Diaw, okay, 27 minutes. Another guy who tends to kind of show up when you need him or show up when he feels like it, but when he does, it's like, man, that guy's got some junk in his game. 8 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists in 27 minutes, and a steal in there. He's a plus 16, and everybody was a plus something. What about Boris that, again, kind of picks his spots, but what about him allows him to do that on this team?
Well, I think the fact that he's been there a year now, it helps out a great deal. He has a connection with Tony, and Boris has never had an issue playing anywhere because he does fit in so well. It's an opportunity that I think I've never seen him quite the way he is right now as far as consistency is concerned. He is a player now that realizes how much was lost last year in Game 6, and I think he really wants an opportunity to get back to the finals and have a different outcome. He's a guy that's been playing for quite some time. He hasn't had an opportunity to play in the finals, and this is kind of like his time now. He represents he appreciates the fact that he is with a good team. And they have all this talent, and it doesn't happen often. He was in Atlanta at one time. Then he was in Phoenix. So he gets that this is not necessarily something that's guaranteed.
People don't realize this guy's shot 50% throughout his career. And there are times where, you start, like he played just 20 games in San Antonio in 2011, 2012, shot 59% in those 20 games. And last year, 54%. This year, 52%. He's an impressive player. He just knows the game so well. But just moving forward, okay, was this a game where they sort of rediscovered who they were and how they can attack, or was this a game where they just happened to be hot and shot 57%? Because if you're going to play against Portland and, you're probably not going to be able to have these lulls in your offense. You're probably going to have to keep up the scoring. Can this be some sort of catapult for the Spurs, or is this a situation where you still have to work out some kinks because, their scoring has been a little bit erratic, at least from the Spurs in this series?
No, I think this is something them getting back to the basics. You look at, the defense, the energy, what's necessary. I think with all the funny thing for me is that all the publicity that the Spurs are getting, they haven't been playing that consistent brand of basketball other than the win streak they had earlier this season. And sometimes when you have those win streaks, you come back and now it's about figuring who you are again because you had so many short steps in the process, or I should say shortcuts in the process. But this is a team that's built on ball movement and body movement, Izzy. It's not about just one particular individual. I like the fact that Tim Duncan, guys tend to, pout or what have you when things aren't necessarily going their way or when they have a lesser role in the process. But that's not the case with Tim because he's just as much as still a intricate key in everything, even in setting screens. I'm watching yesterday when Tony is going off, and Tim is setting the screen, but you can't help off of him too much because they still respect him so much for what he can do. I think this is the first step that the Spurs have had where you can actually look at a game tape, look at their effort defensively, look at their offense, and see the effort on offense where you can be happy as a coach and say, this is what I want every single game. Let's build on this.
Well, so the reason I asked you about Tony Parker and about the Spurs sort of figuring out their offense is because it seems like when they decide, and Tony in particular being kind of the head of the snake, to use that latest cliche that's going around, when Tony decides to drive the ball and collapse the defense, that's when their offense is most successful, whether he's finishing on his own or whether he's starting, rotations and getting open shots. Because, in these 7 games, the scoring average on drives in their 4 wins was 30-plus. In the losses, it was single figures. It was below 10 points. That's a 20-point differential there just from scoring on drives. And their field goal percentages on drives in the wins, 61%, and the losses, 36%. So you can tell that, when they're really attacking instead of just kind of going through the motions and moving the ball, that's really when their offense is going. And, assuming that Portland's offense is going to be tough to stop, you would assume that they would have to go that same route. So they really need to push the ball. And also that sort of limits the turnovers, because when you're driving the ball, being in attack mode, maybe you're not sort of having so many loose passes. And their turnovers in the wins, they averaged 10.5 turnovers, and then the 3 losses, 17.7. Obviously had that one huge turnover game in Game 2. So we'll see if the Spurs can continue that. But, it's a good sign going into the next series when you play your best offensive game in the final game of the previous series. So speaking of the second round, we're going to get into preview mode after we take this quick break.
Is there anything worse than buying razors? You got to drive to the store, find a parking spot, find the locked plastic razor fortress, and the one guy who has a key is on break. Then, when you finally get to the register, it's $20. Madness! Don't put yourself through that. Join DollarShaveClub.com. For a couple of bucks a month, DollarShaveClub.com will ship amazing quality blades and other cool bathroom stuff right to your door. Every month, like clockwork, you get a package in the mail with everything you need for a great shave. Their blades are just as good as the big boys at a fraction of the price. Not an everyday shaver. Join the club and opt for delivery every other month. With DollarShaveClub.com, there's no more trudging to the store for overpriced blades. No more cutting up your face for squeezing too many shaves out of that one last blade in the pack. And most importantly, no more plastic razor fortress. They've got more than razors, too. You got to try their Dr. Carver's Easy Shave Butter, the best thing you can put on your face before shaving it. Join me, everyone at NBA Lockdown, and the hundreds of thousands of guys who have upgraded to the smarter way to shave. Shave time. Shave money. Join DollarShaveClub.com/Bruce. That's DollarShaveClub.com/Bruce.
Someday, people will say, I knew Ty, Ryan, Chase, Dylan, when he was kart racing in 38th place. Someday, people will say, he's on a roll, on fire. Someday, people will shake their heads and say, man, that kid sure did grow up fast. Names are made here. The NASCAR Nationwide Series at Iowa. Sunday at 1:30 Eastern on ESPN.
We had that baggage with us for that series, but now it's pretty much over. It's obviously still lingers, but it's not quite the same. So, hopefully, we just get locked in tomorrow and do what we got to do and have a good showing.
That was Los Angeles Clippers forward Blake Griffin discussing how his team has gone from checked baggage to light carry-ons in this second round, because it's not quite as as momentous. It's not quite as dramatic with Donald Sterling's issue or the audio tape and all that. The controversy that came as a result. That's kind of a little bit more in the background, and you're just kind of in wait and see mode into what Donald Sterling, how and if he fights this whole situation. But for right now, the Clippers can focus on this second round, and they're going to have to against Oklahoma City. It's tricky, Bruce. You can't really go from one series to the next. As much as, I just talked about the Spurs saying, hey, having some momentum with that offense, right, going into the next series. But really, one series going into the next, they have completely different personalities a lot of the times. You can't assume, just because you did something well in one series that you're going to continue to do it in the next series. So the Clippers have a whole new challenge in front of them. It's almost like they have the Golden State Warriors again, but taller and more athletic, right? When you got you go from Steph Curry to Kevin Durant, you go from I don't know who compares to Russell Westbrook, but you've got an animal in Russell Westbrook that can be a triple-double. Let's say a more aggressive Andre Iguodala, okay? They've got a different animal on their hands here. How do you see the Clippers attacking this Oklahoma City Thunder team? Because it's an entirely different issue when you've got, Draymond Green and David Lee in the middle versus Ibaka and Kendrick Perkins. Can Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan be as effective on the inside as they were in that first round?
Yes, they can. And it's going to come a different way, though, Izzy. It's going to come more or less from the ball movement of getting certain shots. I think it'll be, you'll see more perimeter base deals where you get the ball swinging, so a lot of misdirection, and then next thing you know, the ball is dumped into the post. But they're going to have to go quick when they get the ball into Blake Griffin. He has to make moves that are quick, whereas before he could take his time, survey the floor, but this is a good defensive team. So you can't just come down and dump the ball to Blake Griffin with a good defensive team. You got to get the bodies moving a little bit, and then you seal him somewhere and give him the ball in that scenario. I think DeAndre Jordan can still be huge. This is where those little tap outs are going to be big. I think with Serge Ibaka and Kendrick Perkins, they're going to be matched up really well against that group. But I think the athleticism of what the Clippers have, that's what's going to prove bigger and better, I think, against the OKC Thunder, with the penetration getting inside the teeth of the defense for Chris Paul to necessarily get in and kick out for wide open threes. That is going to be key, I think. I think they have more weapons to do certain things. Like J.J. Redick, I think this can be a huge series for him because he understands what it's like to play in big games, and I think you're going to have a more consistent individual in there. Now, the flip side is, what is Matt Barnes' effect on the game? That's where I'm wondering, like, does Matt have that impact or does he not? I know that, he brings a toughness to the game, but now it's more about that toughness being a smart toughness, not getting quick and early fouls early in the game, and then eventually taking you out of the game.
Yeah, that's my question about this, is who's going to defend Kevin Durant? Because coming off a series where he had to face Tony Allen and a little bit of Tayshaun Prince, he's probably going to feel like he just bailed out of jail, like he's a free man, and he's probably going to look to take advantage of whoever defends him. I mean, can Matt Barnes have a significant impact on him, or is this team going to have to really, send two guys at Kevin and see if that Scotty Brooks offense has, a counter to that, has a way to play around that? Because the Grizzlies had the luxury of, for the most part, leaving Tony Allen out there on an island, helping where they, when they absolutely needed to, but, denying Durant. And then once he got the ball, just really pressuring him with Tony Allen. Can the Clippers be nearly as effective, or is this a case where they might say, hey, we have to let Kevin Durant get his and just make sure that nobody else goes off also?
Yeah, that's more or less the key, And it's two different teams. I mean, you have such a defensive-minded team, a team that slows the game down in Memphis, and they're very methodical in what they do. Now you go to the Los Angeles Clippers, and you have a team they like to get up and down. And they don't necessarily have that stopper like Tony Allen, but they do have a group that I think you do say, okay, well, Kevin can get his, and if we're keeping others from adding to it, it allows us the better chance to win.
Wanted to get your thought on this one, because the point guard matchup is pretty intriguing. Chris Paul, even though you saw Steph Curry kind of blow up for a couple of good segments, right? He had 33 and 9 in that last game, and was still a good offensive factor. Chris Paul's individual defense kept him from really going off in that series. When it was a one-on-one situation, you never really saw Steph really break free. You saw him break free off of screens, off of, properly executed plays, off of maybe some transition, or when somebody else was on him, maybe a Darren Collison. Chris Paul's defense is absolutely elite. But is it good enough to really contain Russell Westbrook? Because, as we mentioned, Mike Conley had good defense. That team defense of the Grizzlies was really good. And they've sort of forced him into longer jump shots. I feel like Russell might be able to break free for a little bit more stuff maybe at the rim, really try to get Blake and DeAndre in foul trouble. I guess my question here is, Bruce, is who wins this point guard matchup? Because it's such a dynamic one, and frankly, I might be glued, as much as Kevin Durant's probably going to try to go off, I might be glued to watching those two and check out that dynamic as the most interesting in this series.
No, I think the point guard matchup goes to CP3. CP3 okay. for the standpoint that he is the natural point guard. He is a guy that really looks to help others out. He understands when exactly he can go ahead and attack the basket. And when he attacks the basket, it's for more than one purpose. It's to get the defense off balance, but also for him to finish or get someone set up for an easier shot. And that's what your point guards do. Whereas, Russell Westbrook, he's he's a talent that we haven't seen at that position. He attacks the basket. He pulls up for threes in transition. Sometimes they're good shots. Sometimes they're bad shots. I think he had better decision-making with Chris Paul. But you talk about the fact that he can get into the paint. Chris can get in the paint, too, and he creates a lot of fouls. So I'd have to give the slight edge, Izzy. It goes to Chris Paul, being that he's been a point guard longer.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because you look at, say Russell Westbrook. Hey, is he gonna pass? Well, I mean, he's averaging 8 for that first-round series, 8 assists, and had a couple of triple-doubles. So I think Westbrook's passing probably a little bit underrated. But anyway, we'll move on to the Pacers and the Wizards.
In the locker room, did you get a sense of relief or elation from your guys?
Maybe a little both. I don't know. I mean, it's just you win a series, you're happy. You know, you're happy to move on to the next round and excited for the next opponent.
That was Frank Vogel after his team pulled off a Game 7 win against the Hawks, and move on to face the Wizards, who were impressive against a Bulls team that defensively is physical. Defensively, they move very well, and it was that Wizards offense just executing, playing big to big, especially well. Can the Wizards reenact? Can they repeat that against a bigger Pacers team that has seemingly either found itself again, or what a lot of people are saying, this is a better matchup for them than the Hawks were, and they can sort of play to their own identity? Can the Wizards recreate that level of offense against this Pacers team, do you think?
No, absolutely. I like what the Wizards have done. I think that they can, Izzy. And it's not about – I didn't like the celebration of beating the Hawks finally in Game 7 for the Indiana Pacers. I just think that team is in so much a state of confusion amongst themselves that it really makes it hard to be able to say, hey, the Pacers are going to do this. Because I can't talk about their veterans other than David West and Paul George. Other than that, that's it. So I like what that youthful backcourt has in Wall and Beal, as far as Wall getting in transition and taking the ball to the basket, and Nene being able to, step out and shoot the mid-range shot. And we got to realize that they went up against a very good defensive team in the Chicago Bulls. So the defensive aspect of things, as far as me worrying about will they be able to score, that's not there because they were able to do it against Chicago. And when you put this into the whole deal too, the Pacers, there's no consistency just yet. I got to see them play like they did in the first 3 months of the season before I can even think about them winning this series.
Yeah, I'm with you when it comes to the Wizards. I think that they're capable, okay? I think that they're capable of sort of, having the same kind of offensive impact, having that balance, that big to big, I mentioned with Nene and Gortat. They're just not going to have as much space. These are wider bodies. These are longer arms. Paul George is going to have an effect on whoever he decides to defend, whether it be Ariza, who blew up for 30-plus in a game against Chicago, or Bradley Beal, who, he's a smooth guard. He's a good quality scorer, good shooter, but he's not the most dynamic of athletes. So he can be bothered by, the length and quickness of Paul George if that's who Paul George decides to defend. Or you want to go right to the start, to the head of the snake again, go into the cliche. But with John Wall, basically, you saw Paul cover Jeff Teague for some of that series, and maybe it's time for him to, or, he starts off on Wall, and, maybe George Hill goes on Bradley Beal, and you go Lance Stevenson on Ariza. You have different options if you're the Pacers. And to me, what the Pacers do, or what the Pacers did for themselves in that Game 7, which is just about as good a timing as you can get, is get Roy Hibbert believing in himself a little bit. And, you could tell based on the minutes, he played 31 minutes. Frank Vogel trusted him. He got the 5 blocks. He really affected the game without really requiring the team to go to him necessarily in the low post. And I think, once you got that game under his belt, he goes into a more traditional lineup where, Gortat's not going to be sitting out on the perimeter. Nene's not going to be sitting out farther than maybe 15 to 18 feet tops. Then, he could be more in a comfort zone. They won't have to be scrambling. Although, I also think it was really good for the Pacers to kind of figure that out, to have that option and say, hey, if Roy is going to be a non-factor, we can play without him and we can adjust our defense. We can really scramble and move. We don't have to play that traditional, position by position defense that we were really good at and have been good at all year long, but it's not our only option. And I think the Pacers are kind of growing from this. And say what you will about the Wizards and their success against the Bulls, they still are relatively young, especially in that backcourt, which really drives them. I've got the Pacers winning the series, and it's going to start with they're going to need a Game 1 win, I think, to really make sure that this isn't happening to them again. Maybe they did sort of shake free from the Hawks, and they can use that matchup problem with the Hawks as a quote-unquote excuse as to why that one had gave them trouble. So we'll see what happens, but it's good to get this second round going. Right after those Game 7s, bam, right into the second round. It feels like you're not going to miss a beat here. But that's going to do it all for this edition of the NBA Lockdown Podcast. For Bruce Bowen, I'm Israel Gutierrez. We will talk to you again tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the NBA Lockdown. For more great podcasts, visit the Pod Center page at ESPNradio.com.
For his birthday, I want to send my godson to a playoff game. With the 4-star rated Western Union app, I can send him money conveniently from anywhere and make sure it gets there by tip-off. WesternUnion.com is making things so simple nowadays, and right now, they've got a special promotion going on. Download the free Western Union mobile app, and if you're a new customer, you can send money for 0 fee by using the promo code 2014-2014.
One discount per transfer, no cash value, void where prohibited. This offer expires May 18th. Western Union also makes money from currency exchange.